Billionaire CEO sat alone at graduation until a single mom asked, "Can we sit next to you?" The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Proud families clutched flowers and cameras, their excited chatter echoing off the walls as they claimed the best seats for their graduating loved ones. But in Section C, Row 12, one man sat completely alone. Marcus Wellington adjusted his $3,000 Armani suit and checked his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 2 minutes. Around him, grandparents saved seats with purses, children bounced with excitement, and parents wiped away tears before the ceremony had even begun. The empty chairs on either side of him seemed to expand, creating an invisible barrier that no amount of money could bridge. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails about stock prices and merger deals, anything to avoid the reality of his situation. 52 years old. A net worth that could buy small countries. And not a single person to share this moment with. "Excuse me, sir?" Marcus looked up to find a young brown-skinned woman in a modest dress, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8. Her graduation cap sat slightly askew, and her smile was nervous but warm. "I'm sorry to bother you, but—" She glanced around at the crowded section. "Would it be okay if we sat next to you? Everywhere else seems to be taken." For a moment, Marcus just stared. In his world, people approached him for money, for deals, for favors that could change their fortunes. But this woman's eyes held something different. Something he hadn't seen directed at him in years. Genuine kindness. "Of course," he heard himself saying, gesturing to the empty seats. "Please." As the woman and her son settled beside him, Marcus had no idea that this simple question, "Can we sit next to you?" would unravel everything he thought he knew about success, family, and what it truly means to be wealthy. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of human connection. Welcome back, my lovely family. I sincerely hope every one of you is doing fine. I pray that this story brings you and yours all the wishes you desire. If you're new here, welcome to the community, and to cement your place, hit that subscribe and notification buttons. We love to also know where you're watching from. Drop that in the comments section. At 5:30 a.m., while most of New York still dreamed, Marcus Wellington's penthouse apartment came alive with the soft hum of automation. Smart blinds rolled up to reveal floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Italian marble floors gleamed under designer lighting that gradually brightened to simulate sunrise. But there was no one there to see it. Marcus emerged from his master bedroom, already dressed in his morning workout attire, $200 athletic wear that most people couldn't afford even if they saved for months. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, the only sound breaking the expensive silence. 12,000 square feet of luxury, and not a single voice to fill it. The kitchen island, crafted from a single piece of Carrara marble, stretched longer than most people's living rooms. Marcus pressed a button, and his $15,000 espresso machine whirred to life, crafting a perfect cappuccino that he would drink alone, like every morning for the past 3 years. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Caroline left, taking their daughter Sarah with her. "You love your empire more than your family," she had said, standing in this very kitchen with tears streaming down her face. "When you figure out what actually matters, call me." He never made that call. Marcus scrolled through his tablet, reviewing quarterly reports that would make shareholders millions. Wellington Technologies had grown 400% under his leadership. His apps were used by over 2 billion people worldwide. Forbes had called him the king of digital innovation. Yet as he sat at his dining table, a table built for 12 but set for 1, the victories felt hollow. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had created technology that connected the world, but he had never felt more disconnected. By 7 a.m., his driver was waiting downstairs. Marcus slid into the back of his Tesla Model S, the leather seats still warm from the heating system that anticipated his schedule. As they glided through Manhattan traffic, he watched families through tinted windows, parents walking children to school, couples sharing coffee, teenagers laughing together on street corners. When had he stopped being part of that world? The answer came in fragments, memories that surfaced like unwanted emails. Sarah's first piano recital, he had missed it for a board meeting in Tokyo. Her 16th birthday party, interrupted by 3 urgent phone calls. Her high school graduation, he had attended, but spent most of it responding to a crisis in the London office. The pattern was always the same, he thought to himself. Tomorrow I'll have more time. Next month will be different. After this deal closes, after this quarter ends, after we go public, then I'll focus on family. Tomorrow never came. Now Sarah was graduating from Columbia with a degree in social work, determined to help people the way her father never had. She had sent him the invitation out of obligation, not love. The elegant cardstock felt like evidence of his failures when it arrived at his office, addressed to Marcus Wellington, though, rather than Dad. He had built an empire, but lost his kingdom. B-roll, Marcus in his executive office, city skyline behind him, photos of Sarah as a child face down on his desk. Wellington Technologies occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. As Marcus walked through the office, employees straightened in their chairs, their conversations shifting from casual to professional. He was respected, feared, admired, but not loved. The distinction had never bothered him before. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," his assistant Jennifer said, already extending his coffee and the morning briefing. She had worked for him for 8 years, knew his coffee preference better than his ex-wife, and had never once asked about his personal life. The professional distance he maintained wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Getting close to people meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford in business. But what about in life? His corner office was a monument to success. Awards lined the walls, magazine covers featuring his face, photos with world leaders and celebrities. Yet the most telling detail was what wasn't there: no family photos on his desk, no personal touches that revealed the man behind the CEO. The morning flew by in its usual rhythm of calls, meetings, and decisions that moved millions of dollars with the stroke of a pen. But today felt different. Today, he would sit in an auditorium and watch his daughter graduate, a milestone he should have been anticipating for months. Instead, he had only remembered because Jennifer had put it on his calendar. "Your car will be ready at 1 p.m. for Columbia University," she had reminded him that morning. "The ceremony begins at 2. He had nodded, signed 3 more documents, and approved a merger that would create jobs for thousands of people. But he couldn't shake the image of that invitation, sitting unopened on his desk for 2 weeks because he had been too busy changing the world to notice his daughter was changing too. Stories like Marcus's remind us that success means different things to different people. Sometimes the most successful people are actually the loneliest, carrying achievements like armor that protects them from connection but also prevents them from experiencing true fulfillment. If you're discovering these hidden truths about what really matters in life, there's so much more depth to explore in the human experience. At 12:45 p.m., Marcus straightened his tie, grabbed his keys, and prepared to face the one person whose opinion of him mattered more than any board of directors, any shareholder, any business rival he had ever conquered. His daughter. The elevator descended 47 floors, each number counting down like a timer toward a reckoning he had been avoiding for years. As the doors opened to the lobby, Marcus Wellington, billionaire, chief executive officer, king of his technological empire, felt something he rarely experienced in boardrooms or negotiations. It was fear. Not the calculated risk of a business deal or the strategic challenge of outmaneuvering competition. This was deeper, more personal. The fear of looking into his daughter's eyes and seeing confirmation of what he already knew, that he had traded the most important relationship in his life for relationships that existed only on paper and profit statements. The Tesla waited at the curb, engine silent, like a silver chariot that would carry him toward either redemption or final judgment. As Manhattan blurred past the windows, Marcus realized that for all his success in predicting market trends and technological shifts, he had no idea what the next few hours would bring. For the first time in decades, Marcus Wellington was entering a situation where his wealth, his power, and his influence meant absolutely nothing. He was just a father, hoping his daughter might still have room in her life for the man who had forgotten how to be one. While Marcus Wellington sipped his $50 cappuccino in marble silence, Elena Rodriguez was already 2 hours into her day in a 600-square-foot apartment in Astoria, Queens. The alarm clock's harsh buzz at 4:30 a.m. had been unnecessary. She had been awake since 4:15, her mind racing through the day's impossible schedule. Today was graduation day. After 6 years of night classes, weekend study sessions, and clinical rotations that sometimes ran 18 hours straight, she would finally receive her Bachelor of Science in nursing. But first, she had to survive the morning. "Mijo, wake up," she whispered, gently shaking 8-year-old Diego's shoulder. Her son stirred in the twin bed they shared, his dark hair tousled, small hands rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is it graduation day, Mommy?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep but eyes bright with excitement. "See, baby. Today your mama becomes a nurse." The words still felt surreal. Elena Rodriguez, high school dropout, teen mother, former waitress and house cleaner, a registered nurse. Some mornings she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. Their apartment told the story of their journey. Nursing textbooks created towers on every surface, their pages worn from late-night studying. Diego's artwork covered the refrigerator, crayon drawings of his mom in scrubs with "World's Best Nurse" written in his careful 8-year-old handwriting. A single photograph on the kitchen counter showed Elena in her clinical uniform, exhausted but smiling after a particularly brutal rotation in the ER. "Can you help Mama pick out what to wear?" Elena asked, opening their shared closet. A few professional outfits she had bought secondhand, Diego's school clothes, and the cap and gown hanging like a promise fulfilled. Diego scrambled out of bed, suddenly fully awake. This was their ritual. He was her fashion consultant, her study buddy, her cheerleader, and her reason for everything. At 8 years old, he had seen his mother cry over chemistry equations, celebrate passing the NCLEX practice exams, and work double shifts to pay for textbooks. "The blue dress," he decided immediately. "It makes you look like a real nurse." Elena laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I am a real nurse now, remember?" But even as she said it, imposter syndrome whispered in her ear. Did she really belong among her classmates, most of whom had come straight from high school with family support and financial stability? Would anyone believe that the girl who got pregnant at 16, who dropped out to work 3 jobs to support her son, deserved to walk across that stage? The morning routine was choreographed through years of practice. Elena made breakfast eggs and toast for Diego, coffee strong enough to fuel rocket ships for herself, while he laid out her good shoes and checked that her cap and tassel were perfect. They were a team, had been since the day Diego was born and his father disappeared, leaving Elena with nothing but determination and a baby who looked at her like she could conquer the world. "Tell me the story again, Mommy," Diego said as they ate, his legs swinging from the kitchen chair. Elena smiled. He loved this story, had heard it 100 times, but never tired of the telling. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a scared 16-year-old girl who thought her life was over when she got pregnant." "But she was wrong," Diego chimed in, knowing his part. "But she was very wrong. because that baby was the smartest, most wonderful boy in the world, and he gave her a reason to fight for something better. The truth was more complicated than the fairy tale version she told Diego. There had been nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she was fooling herself. Years when every dollar was accounted for, when choosing between Diego's school supplies and her textbooks meant she went without both. Moments when classmates half her age complained about their parents' expectations while Elena worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital, cleaning bedpans and mopping floors while dreaming of the day she'd wear scrubs instead of a janitor's uniform. "Why did you want to be a nurse?" Diego had asked her once, during one of those late-night study sessions when she was cramming for pharmacology finals. "Because," she had told him, "nurses help people when they're scared and hurting. And I know what it feels like to be scared and hurting." That memory sustained her through the hardest moments, the nights when exhaustion made her eyes burn, when professors looked at her like she didn't belong, when other students talked casually about spring break trips that cost more than Elena made in a month. But she had made it. Against every statistic, every expectation, every voice that said a girl like her should be grateful for whatever life handed her, she had made it. At 11 a.m., they boarded the subway toward Manhattan. Diego wore his best clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt Elena had found at a thrift store, polished shoes that were still a size too big but would last him through next year. He carried her honor cords in a small bag, treating them like precious artifacts. "Are you nervous, Mommy?" he asked as the train rumbled through Queens. Elena considered the question. Nervous didn't begin to cover it. She was terrified, excited, proud, and overwhelmed all at once. But looking at Diego's expectant face, she found the truth that mattered most. "No, baby. I'm ready." Columbia University's campus stretched before them like something from a movie. Elena had been here for orientation, for clinical interviews, for final exams, but today it felt different. Today she wasn't a visitor or a student struggling to prove she belonged. Today she was a graduate. The auditorium was already filling when they arrived, families claiming the best seats, cameras and flowers marking territory with the efficiency of a military operation. Elena clutched Diego's hand as they climbed the steps, scanning for available seats. The good spots were taken. Families had arrived early, saved seats with purses and jackets, created little kingdoms of celebration. Elena felt that familiar tug of not quite belonging, the same feeling she'd carried through 6 years of being older than her classmates, different than her peers. There, Diego pointed toward a section with scattered empty seats. "But that man is all by himself." Elena followed his gaze to see a man in an expensive suit sitting alone in what should have been prime seating territory. Something about his posture, straight but somehow lonely, made her pause. In her years working at the hospital, she had learned to read people's pain, and this man radiated a particular kind of hurt she recognized. The isolation of success that had cost too much. "Maybe he wouldn't mind company," she murmured, more to herself than to Diego. As they approached, Elena felt her courage waver. The man's clothes probably cost more than her rent. His watch caught the light like a small sun. What was she thinking, disturbing someone who clearly operated in a different universe? But Diego squeezed her hand, and she remembered the lesson she had been teaching him his entire life. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite the fear. "Excuse me, sir?" The man looked up, and Elena saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not annoyance or dismissal, but surprise. As if no one had spoken to him like a regular human being in a very long time. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would it be okay if we sat next to you? Everywhere else seems to be taken." For a moment, time suspended. Elena became acutely aware of the contrast they must present. Her second-hand dress and Diego's thrift store clothes next to this man's obvious wealth. She prepared for polite rejection, for the subtle dismissal she had experienced countless times. Instead, something softened in his expression. "Of course, please." As they settled into the seats beside him, Elena caught Diego staring openly at the man, his 8-year-old curiosity unfiltered by adult social conventions. "Are you here for graduation too?" Diego asked. Elena started to shush him, but the man smiled, the first genuine expression she had seen cross his face. "I am. My daughter is graduating today." "My mama is graduating," Diego announced proudly. "She's going to be a nurse and help sick people get better." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry, he's very excited. We don't mean to bother you." "You're not bothering me," the man said, and something in his voice suggested that company was exactly what he needed, even if he didn't know how to ask for it. As the auditorium continued to fill around them, Elena Rodriguez, single mother, survivor, registered nurse, found herself sitting next to a man who had everything she thought she wanted, but who looked at her son with something she recognized from her own mirror. Longing for connection. For family. For the kind of love that money couldn't buy but that filled every corner of her modest life in Queens. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were about to discover that sometimes the most important encounters happen not when we're looking for them, but when we simply have the courage to ask, "Can we sit next to you?" The auditorium hummed with anticipation as families settled into their seats, programs rustling like autumn leaves. Marcus found himself stealing glances at the woman beside him, Elena. He had learned when Diego proudly introduced his mama to their new seat neighbor. There was something about her presence that felt both foreign and familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. "Is your daughter excited about graduation?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the warmth of someone accustomed to making conversation with strangers. In her years working hospital shifts, she had mastered the art of putting people at ease. Marcus paused, the simple question revealing the chasm between his relationship with Sarah and the easy affection he witnessed between Elena and Diego. "I hope so," he said finally. "We haven't spoken much recently." The honesty surprised him. In boardrooms, he crafted responses with surgical precision, revealing nothing that might be used as leverage. But something about Elena's genuine interest dissolved his usual defenses. "That's hard," she said simply, without judgment or prying questions. "Family is complicated." Diego, meanwhile, had begun a careful inventory of Marcus's appearance with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Your watch is really shiny," he announced. "Does it tell time and space?" Elena started to redirect him, but Marcus chuckled, the first genuine laugh that had escaped him in months. "It tells time all around the world," he explained. "See this little window? Right now it's showing what time it is in Tokyo." "Whoa," Diego breathed, leaning closer. "Why do you need to know what time it is in Tokyo?" "I have people who work for me there. Sometimes I need to call them when they're awake and I'm awake." "You must have a really important job," Diego said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who hadn't yet learned to be impressed by wealth. Marcus felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without knowing his net worth, his company's stock price, his influence? Diego saw only a man with an interesting watch, not the Marcus Wellington whose every move was analyzed by financial reporters. "What about you?" Marcus asked, turning to Elena. "What kind of nursing do you want to do?" Elena's face lit up with the same enthusiasm Diego had shown moments before. "Emergency medicine," she said. "I want to work in the ER, help people when they're having the worst day of their lives." "That sounds—" Marcus searched for words that wouldn't sound patronizing, challenging. "It is. But I know what it's like to feel scared and alone in a hospital. When I had Diego, I was 16 and terrified. The nurse who took care of me, Maria Santos, she changed my life. She treated me like I mattered, like I wasn't just another teen pregnancy statistic. Elena's voice carried the weight of lived experience, each word chosen with the precision of someone who had earned every truth she spoke. Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn into her story in a way that conference presentations and quarterly reports had never managed to captivate him. "She's the reason I went back to school," Elena continued. "I wanted to be that person for someone else. The one who shows up when everything falls apart." Marcus thought about his own empire, built on algorithms and applications that connected billions of people to information, entertainment, and each other. He had revolutionized communication, but when had he last had a conversation that mattered? When had he last shown up for anyone when everything fell apart? "Mama helps everyone," Diego added proudly. "She helped Mrs. Chen when she fell down the stairs, and she taught Mr. Rodriguez how to check his blood sugar, and she always knows what to do when I have nightmares." The simplicity of Diego's examples struck Marcus harder than any business achievement ever had. Elena's impact couldn't be measured in stock prices or market share, but in moments of human connection that rippled outward in ways no algorithm could track. "You raised an amazing son," Marcus said, and meant it. Elena's smile could have powered the auditorium. "He raised me too in a lot of ways. Made me want to be better than I thought I could be." The lights dimmed, and the ceremony began. As the dean took the podium, Marcus watched Elena's face transform with anticipation. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress, and he realized she was nervous, not just excited, but genuinely anxious about this moment she had worked 6 years to reach. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Columbia University's commencement ceremony." As the processional began, Marcus found himself scanning the graduates for Sarah, but his attention kept drifting to Elena. She sat forward in her seat, hands clasped tightly, eyes bright with unshed tears of anticipation. When had he last wanted something as purely, as desperately as she wanted this moment? "There she is," Diego whispered loudly, pointing as Elena appeared in the line of graduates. She walked with her chin up, her shoulders back, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had earned every step. Marcus felt an unexpected surge of pride, not for Sarah, whom he hadn't even spotted yet, but for this woman he had met an hour ago who had transformed herself through sheer determination and love for her son. "She looks beautiful," he said, and Diego beamed as if Marcus had personally validated his entire world. The ceremony proceeded with the traditional pomp, speeches about bright futures and unlimited potential, awards for academic excellence, recognition for community service. Marcus had attended dozens of such events for business purposes, but this felt different. He wasn't here as a donor or board member, but as a witness to dreams becoming reality. When they called Elena's name, Elena Rodriguez, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, magna cum laude, Diego jumped to his feet, whooping with abandon. Marcus found himself standing too, applauding with genuine enthusiasm for a woman whose journey from teen mother to registered nurse represented more courage than any business deal he had ever negotiated. Elena walked across the stage with grace, accepted her diploma with trembling hands, and looked out into the audience. When her eyes found theirs, she pressed her fingers to her lips and blew a kiss to Diego, who caught it and held it to his heart with 8-year-old solemnity. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he had built around his emotions, letting in light he hadn't realized he was missing. "That's my mama," Diego announced to anyone within hearing distance, his voice carrying pure joy and pride. After Elena's moment, Marcus finally spotted Sarah in the sea of graduates. She looked beautiful in her cap and gown, but there was a distance in her expression even from across the auditorium. When her name was called, Sarah Wellington, Bachelor of Arts in Social Work, Marcus stood and applauded, but his daughter's eyes swept right past their section without acknowledgement. The contrast was stark and painful. Elena and Diego's connection blazed like a beacon, while Marcus and Sarah remained islands of unresolved hurt and missed opportunities. As the ceremony concluded and graduates began to reunite with their families, Marcus felt the familiar weight of isolation settling back around his shoulders. Elena would go celebrate with Diego, probably at some modest restaurant where they would laugh and reminisce about their journey. Sarah would likely leave with friends, continuing the emotional distance she had maintained since her parents' divorce. But then Diego tugged on his jacket. "Are you going to find your daughter now?" The question hung in the air between them, simple but loaded with implications Marcus wasn't ready to face. "She's probably busy with her friends," he said, the excuse tasting bitter on his tongue. Elena had returned, her face glowing with accomplishment, her diploma clutched carefully in both hands. She looked between Marcus and Diego, picking up on the tension with the intuitive skill of someone trained to read people's pain. These moments happen all around us, ordinary encounters that become extraordinary when we open ourselves to connection. Sometimes a stranger's courage to reach out can illuminate truths we've been avoiding about our own lives. If you've ever felt moved by unexpected human connections, there are so many more stories of people finding each other in the most unlikely circumstances. "Would you like to join us for lunch?" Elena asked suddenly, the invitation surprising all three of them. Nothing fancy, just a little place Diego loves. Their celebration menu includes chicken nuggets and ice cream. Marcus stared at her, this woman who had already given him more genuine human contact in 2 hours than he'd experienced in months, now extending an invitation that felt like a lifeline he didn't deserve. "I couldn't impose," he began, falling back on the polite deflection that had protected him from vulnerability for so long. "You wouldn't be imposing," Elena said firmly. "You'd be joining us. There's a difference." Diego grabbed Marcus's hand with the unconscious trust of childhood. "Please come. Mama makes the best conversation, and I want to hear more about Tokyo time." Looking down at the boy's upturned face, then at Elena's warm smile, Marcus felt the walls he had spent decades building begin to crumble. For the first time in years, he had a choice that wasn't about profit margins or strategic advantage, but about simple human connection. He could go back to his penthouse, eat alone, and spend another evening reviewing financial reports that would never love him back. Or he could follow this extraordinary woman and her remarkable son into whatever came next, stepping into a life he had forgotten existed. "I'd like that," he heard himself say, the words feeling foreign but somehow right. "I'd like that very much." As they walked toward the auditorium exit together, Elena with her diploma, Diego bouncing with excitement, and Marcus with his first genuine smile in years, none of them could have predicted that this simple lunch invitation would become the first step in rebuilding not just one family, but several. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of inclusion, with someone brave enough to say, "You can sit with us." The restaurant Diego had chosen was everything Marcus's usual dining establishments were not. Colorful papal picado hung from the ceiling, mariachi music played softly from hidden speakers, and the aroma of authentic Mexican cuisine filled the air like a warm embrace. Abuela's kitchen occupied a corner space in Queens that probably cost less per month than Marcus spent on wine. But as they settled into a red vinyl booth that had seen countless family celebrations, Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time a meal had felt so alive. "This is where we came when I passed my NCLEX exam," Elena explained, sliding into the booth across from him while Diego bounced beside her. "And when Diego got all A's on his report card. And when I got accepted to Columbia. It's our celebration place." Marcus looked around the modest restaurant with new eyes. The walls were covered with photos, families, graduations, quinceañeras, birthday parties. generations of joy documented in faded snapshots. His own restaurants had Michelin stars and views of the city skyline, but none had ever held this much life. "What's good here?" he asked, scanning a laminated menu that offered nothing over $15. "Everything," Diego announced with absolute authority. "But the mole is the best. Mama cries every time she eats it because it reminds her of her grandma." Elena laughed, her cheeks reddening slightly. "I don't cry every time." "You totally do," Diego insisted with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Happy tears, though. You told me happy tears don't count." B-roll. The warm, family-owned restaurant atmosphere, Elena and Diego sharing an easy laugh, Marcus observing their interaction with wonder. Marcus watched this exchange with fascination. In his world, emotional displays were weaknesses to be managed, vulnerabilities to be hidden. But Elena wore her feelings openly, and Diego had learned that emotions weren't something to fear but to celebrate, even the complicated ones. "Tell me about your grandmother," Marcus said, surprising himself with the personal nature of the question. Elena's expression softened with memory. "Abuela Rosa. She raised me after my mom died when I was 12. Didn't speak much English, but she taught me everything important without needing words. How to be strong, how to love fiercely, how to make $1 stretch into a week's worth of meals." She paused, lost in memory for a moment. "She died when Diego was 3. Never got to see me graduate high school, let alone college. But I know she'd be proud." The server arrived, a young woman who greeted Elena like family, cooing over Diego and congratulating Elena on her graduation with genuine warmth. When she turned to Marcus, her smile remained bright despite his obvious wealth disparity with the usual clientele. "First time at Abuela's?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus replied. "What would you recommend?" "Trust Elena," the server said with a grin. "She's got good taste." As Elena ordered for all of them, Marcus marveled at how seamlessly she navigated this world of relationships and connections. She remembered the server's name, asked about her classes at community college, inquired about her mother's recovery from surgery. These weren't networking opportunities or strategic alliances, they were genuine human connections that Elena cultivated simply because she saw people as worthy of care. "So," Elena said after their server left, "tell us about your daughter. What's she studying?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, revealing the depth of his failure as a father. "Social work," he said quietly. "She wants to help people." "Like you help people with your technology?" Diego asked innocently. Marcus paused, considering the question seriously. Did his work actually help people, or did it just make them more efficient consumers? His apps connected millions of users, but had they created genuine connection or just the illusion of it? "I create tools that people use," he said finally. "But I'm not sure that's the same as helping them." Elena studied his face with the perceptive gaze of someone trained to assess pain. "What kind of relationship do you want with your daughter?" The directness of the question should have triggered his defensive reflexes, but instead it opened something inside him that had been locked away for years. "I want." He began, then stopped, struggling to articulate desires he had buried under decades of business priorities. "I want her to call me because she wants to talk to me, not because she has to. I want to know what makes her laugh, what keeps her awake at night, who she's dating, what her dreams are." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. "I want her to look at me the way Diego looks at you." Elena reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, a simple gesture that sent shockwaves through Marcus's carefully controlled world. When was the last time someone had touched him with comfort rather than calculation? "It's not too late," she said simply. "Love doesn't have an expiration date." Their food arrived, and Marcus discovered that Diego hadn't exaggerated about the mole. The complex sauce carried layers of flavor that spoke of generations of refinement, of family recipes passed down through love rather than written instruction. As promised, Elena's eyes filled with tears at the first taste. "Happy tears," Diego confirmed, patting his mother's arm with 8-year-old wisdom. As they ate, Diego regaled Marcus with stories about school, his best friend Carlos, and his dreams of becoming either an astronaut or a professional soccer player, maybe both, like on weekends. His enthusiasm was infectious, his curiosity boundless, and his acceptance of Marcus complete. "Do you have kids?" Diego asked with characteristic directness. "I have a daughter, but she's grown up now," Marcus replied. "Did you teach her about business stuff when she was little?" Marcus felt the familiar ache of regret. "No, I was too busy working to spend much time teaching her anything." Diego considered this with the seriousness of a small philosopher. "Mama works a lot too, but she always has time for important stuff, like helping with homework and making funny voices when she reads to me." The innocent observation landed like a precision strike on Marcus's conscience. Elena had worked multiple jobs while raising Diego and putting herself through nursing school, yet she had never missed the important stuff. Marcus had built an empire but missed his daughter's childhood in the process. "Diego's right," Elena said gently. "I learned early that time is the only thing you can't make more of. Money you can always earn more of, but moments with the people you love? Those are limited edition." As the afternoons stretched into evening, Marcus found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, about building his first app in his garage, about the thrill of seeing his code change how people communicated, about the loneliness that success had brought. Elena listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that revealed depths he had forgotten existed within himself. "Why technology?" she asked. "What drew you to it originally?" Marcus smiled, remembering his younger, more idealistic self. "I wanted to connect people. My parents divorced when I was 10, and my dad moved across the country. This was before video calls, before social media. I used to write him letters, but it took so long, and by the time he responded, whatever I wanted to share felt old." He paused, lost in memory. "I thought if I could help people communicate instantly, no matter where they were, families could stay closer. Ironically, the more successful I became at connecting the world, the more disconnected I became from my own family." Elena nodded with understanding. Sometimes the thing we're trying to fix in the world is the thing that's broken in us. The wisdom in her words hit Marcus like lightning. He had spent decades building bridges for others while burning the ones in his own life. As they prepared to leave, Marcus felt a desperation he hadn't experienced since the early days of his startup, the fear that something precious was about to slip away. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that surprised all of them, "I have a proposition." She raised an eyebrow, wariness creeping into her expression. "What kind of proposition?" "My company has a medical division. We develop health tech, telemedicine platforms, hospital management systems. We need nurses who understand both technology and patient care, consultants who can help us build better tools." He was improvising, but as the words left his mouth, he realized they weren't just desperate attempts to maintain connection. They were good business sense wrapped in personal need. It would be contract work initially, flexible hours, much better pay than hospital work. You'd be helping design systems that could help millions of patients and thousands of nurses. Elena stared at him, her eyes searching his face for ulterior motives. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I don't know anything about technology." "You know about people," he replied. "You understand what they need when they're vulnerable, when they're scared. That's more valuable than any programming skill." Diego looked between them with excitement. "Mama, you could help sick people and help the man who knows what time it is in Tokyo." Despite the tension, Elena laughed. "It's a generous offer, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Marcus said firmly. "It's an investment in someone who represents everything my company has forgotten about human connection." The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility and uncertainty. Marcus held his breath, realizing that Elena's answer would determine not just her future, but his own path toward redemption. "I need to think about it," Elena said finally. "This is a lot." "Of course," Marcus replied, though every instinct screamed at him to press harder, to close the deal. But this wasn't a business transaction. This was something far more important and infinitely more fragile. As they stood to leave, Diego hugged Marcus around the waist with the uninhibited affection of childhood. "Thank you for eating with us," he said. "You're not lonely anymore when you're with us." Out of the mouths of babes. As Marcus walked them to the subway station, he felt a transformation beginning that went deeper than any business pivot or strategic restructuring. For the first time in years, he was thinking beyond quarterly reports and market share. He was thinking about what kind of man he wanted to be, what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. Elena's hand found his arm as they reached the station entrance. "Marcus," she said softly, "thank you for today. For seeing us, for celebrating with us. For reminding me that kindness exists in unexpected places." As the subway carried Elena and Diego back to Queens, Marcus stood alone on the Manhattan platform, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He felt hopeful. The billionaire who had sat alone at graduation had discovered something worth more than any acquisition, more valuable than any market victory. The possibility of becoming the kind of person Diego could hug, the kind of man Elena could trust, and maybe, eventually, the kind of father Sarah could forgive. December arrived in New York with the kind of snow that transforms even the grittiest corners of the city into something magical. 6 months had passed since graduation day, and Marcus Wellington's life had been quietly revolutionized in ways that would never appear on a financial report. The changes began small. Elena had accepted his job offer after a week of careful consideration and consultations with 3 different people she trusted, including Diego, whose 8-year-old wisdom had proven surprisingly sound. "Mama," he had said, "you always tell me to help people when I can. This is just helping people with computers." What started as a consulting contract had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Elena's insights into patient care had led to a complete redesign of Wellington Technologies' healthcare software. Her ability to translate between the language of medicine and the language of technology had made her invaluable not just to Marcus, but to the entire medical division. More importantly, their professional relationship had deepened into something that felt like family. The Elena Rodriguez who now walked through the glass towers of Wellington Technologies bore little resemblance to the nervous woman who had asked to sit next to a stranger at graduation. She wore confidence like a tailored suit, her nursing experience translated into tech solutions that were already improving patient outcomes in hospitals across 3 states. But the most dramatic transformation belonged to Marcus himself. The man who had once eaten every meal alone now found himself with a standing dinner invitation at a modest apartment in Queens every Sunday. Elena had instituted family dinner Sundays, after Diego casually mentioned that Marcus probably didn't have anyone to cook for him. "Everyone needs somewhere to belong," Elena had explained when Marcus protested that he didn't want to impose. "Besides, Diego's been teaching you Spanish, and you can't quit now when you're finally rolling your R's properly." These Sunday dinners had become the anchor of Marcus's week. He would arrive with groceries, always too much, always too expensive, and Elena would patiently teach him to cook dishes that couldn't be ordered from any restaurant. Diego would regale them with stories from school while Marcus listened with the attention he had never given to Sarah's childhood tales. "Marcus," Diego announced one Sunday while they were making tamales, his small hands covered in masa. "You're like my bonus dad." The words hit Marcus with unexpected force. He had spent decades building a business empire but had never earned a title that mattered as much as bonus dad from an 8-year-old who had known him for 6 months. But the relationship that had taken the most courage to rebuild was the one that mattered most. 3 months after graduation, Marcus had finally made the call he should have made years ago. Sarah had answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautious when she saw his name on the caller ID. "Dad." "Sarah, I was hoping we could talk. In person if you're willing." The silence stretched so long Marcus thought she might have hung up. Finally, "Okay, but I choose the place." She had chosen a small coffee shop in the village, the kind of place Marcus would never have noticed before Elena taught him that the best conversations happened in spaces that prioritized connection over status. Sarah arrived exactly on time, looking so much like her mother that Marcus's breath caught. But her eyes, those were his own, holding the same wariness he had once worn like armor. "You look good," she had said, settling into the worn chair across from him. "Different." "I feel different." Marcus had spent hours preparing for this conversation, but now, faced with his daughter's guarded expression, all his planned speeches evaporated. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. Not just for missing your graduation invitation, but for missing everything. Your childhood, your dreams, your life." Sarah had listened as Marcus told her about Elena and Diego, about learning what it meant to show up for people, about discovering that success without love was just expensive loneliness. He didn't make excuses for his failures, didn't blame business pressures or divorce stress. He simply acknowledged the truth. He had chosen work over family, repeatedly and consciously, until the family stopped choosing him back. "I can't undo the past," he had said finally, "but I want to be different going forward. If you'll let me." Sarah had cried then, the first tears she had shed in front of him since she was 12. "I missed you, Dad. I missed having a father who cared about my life more than his stock portfolio." That conversation had been the first of many. Tentative coffee meetings evolved into longer lunches, which grew into walks in Central Park where Marcus learned about his daughter's work with homeless families, her passion for social justice, her dreams of opening a community center in an underserved neighborhood. And slowly, carefully, they began rebuilding what had been broken. The breakthrough came when Sarah met Elena and Diego. Marcus had been nervous about introducing the two most important parts of his new life, but Elena's warmth and Diego's infectious enthusiasm had melted Sarah's remaining walls within minutes. "So you're the woman who taught my dad to be human again," Sarah had said during their first dinner together. Elena had laughed. "Your dad taught himself. I just reminded him that he already knew how to love people, he'd just forgotten to practice." Which brought them to this moment, Christmas Eve in Elena's living room, where 4 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way were creating new traditions. The apartment glowed with warm light from string lights Diego had insisted on hanging everywhere possible. A modest Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with a mixture of Elena's carefully preserved ornaments from her childhood, Diego's handmade crafts from school, and several expensive but thoughtful additions from Marcus, including a star for the top that lit up when Diego touched it. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, helping Diego organize his presents with the patience Marcus remembered from her childhood but had been too busy to fully appreciate. Elena moved between the kitchen and living room, managing multiple dishes with the efficiency of someone accustomed to doing everything herself, though now she had help. Marcus stood at the stove, carefully stirring Elena's grandmother's pozole recipe while she guided him through the final steps. 6 months ago, he had employed a private chef and ate most meals alone. Tonight, he was cooking for his chosen family in a kitchen smaller than his walk-in closet, and he had never felt more accomplished. "Perfect," Elena said, tasting the broth. "Abuela Rosa would approve." think I'm ready to cook for you instead of the other way around? Marcus asked. Let's start with you not burning the tortillas, then we'll discuss role reversals, Elena replied with a grin. Diego bounced over to them, unable to contain his excitement any longer. Can we do presents now? Please? I've been good all day, and Marcus promised to tell me about the time difference in Australia. Sarah laughed from her spot on the floor. I think Australia can wait until after dinner, buddy. But Marcus was already reaching for his jacket. Actually, I have something I wanted to give everyone now. Before dinner. He pulled out 3 envelopes, each carefully sealed and labeled in his precise handwriting. These aren't really gifts, they're investments, in all of you. He handed the first envelope to Elena. Inside was a contract offering her a permanent position as Director of Patient Experience Technology at Wellington Technologies, with a salary that would change her life and Diego's future. But more importantly, it was formal recognition of how invaluable she had become to his company and his world. Marcus, this is... Elena stared at the numbers, then at him. This is too much. It's exactly what you're worth, he replied firmly. What you've been worth all along. The second envelope went to Sarah. Inside was a business plan and funding proposal for the community center she had dreamed about, complete with architectural sketches and a site proposal in the neighborhood where she wanted to make a difference. Dad. Sarah's voice broke as she read through the documents. You remembered. You listened. I'm still learning how to listen, Marcus said, but I'm getting better at it. The third envelope was for Diego, and inside was something that made the 8-year-old gasp with wonder. A savings account in his name, already funded, designated for his education, whatever path that might take, whether astronaut, soccer player, or something not yet dreamed of. But there was something else in Diego's envelope, adoption papers. I know I can't replace your father, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. But I was hoping, if it's okay with your mama, that maybe I could be another kind of dad to you. The kind who shows up for soccer games and science fairs and teaches you about time zones just because you're curious. Diego looked between the papers and Marcus with the seriousness of someone much older than 8. Then he launched himself into Marcus's arms with the kind of hug that rewrites a person's understanding of what wealth really means. Does this mean you're staying? Diego whispered against Marcus's shoulder. If you'll have me, Marcus whispered back. For as long as you'll have me. Elena was crying now, happy tears that didn't count, according to Diego's rules, and Sarah was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The moment felt suspended in time, perfect in its imperfection, profound in its simplicity. As they settled around Elena's small dining table for Christmas Eve dinner, Marcus looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight and realized he had finally learned the difference between being successful and being rich. Success was measured in quarterly reports and market share. But richness? Richness was Diego explaining why Santa speaks different languages in different countries while Sarah and Elena debated the best way to serve pozole. Richness was Elena squeezing his hand under the table when she thought no one was looking. Richness was Sarah calling him Dad without reservation for the first time in years. Before we eat, Marcus said, raising his glass of Elena's homemade horchata, I want to make a toast. The table fell quiet, 3 faces turning toward him with expectation. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what it meant to be successful. I had built an empire, accumulated wealth, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But I was eating every meal alone, sleeping in an empty house, and my own daughter couldn't stand to be in the same room with me. He looked around the table, his voice growing stronger. Then a brave woman asked if she could sit next to me, and everything changed. Elena, you and Diego didn't just invite me into your lives, you taught me how to live. Sarah, you forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness and gave me a chance to be the father I should have been all along. His voice cracked with emotion. "I spent my whole career trying to connect the world through technology, but I forgot the most important connection of all, the one that happens when people choose to love each other, not because they have to, but because they want to." Marcus raised his glass higher. "To family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build. To love that doesn't have an expiration date. And to the woman who proved that sometimes the most valuable question you can ask a stranger is simply, 'Can we sit next to you?'" Stories like this remind us that the most important transformations often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. When we open our hearts to unexpected connections, we create space for miracles to unfold. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of human connection to change lives, join our community of people who choose love over fear, inclusion over isolation. Share with us in the comments below. Where are you watching from? And tell us about a time when a stranger's kindness changed your day, your week, or maybe even your life. As they clinked glasses around Elena's modest table, for people who had found each other against all odds began creating the kind of memories that no amount of money could buy. Marcus Wellington had finally learned the secret that Elena Rodriguez had known all along. True wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in moments like these, when love multiplies by being shared. Outside, snow continued to fall on New York City, covering everything in pristine white. Inside a small apartment in Queens, a billionaire chief executive, a single mother turned healthcare innovator, a social worker with dreams of changing the world, and an 8-year-old philosopher were discovering that the best families aren't always the ones we're born into. Sometimes they're the ones we have the courage to create. And it all started with a simple question that changed 4 lives forever. Can we sit next to you? That is it, my lovely family. If you have come this far, then you are already part of this close-knit family. Please don't miss the next video tomorrow.